thank you.
Is Mark there?
I am, yes.
You are. Hi, Mark. I just saw MH on the screen. So, okay, good. We're good to go. Call to order this committee of the whole meeting for the Village of Ashcroft for Monday, November 23rd, 2020. Do I have a motion to adopt the agenda as presented? Councillor Toohey makes the motion. Councillor Anderson seconds. Any errors or omissions on the question? All those in favor? Opposed, carried. Excuse me, we have one delegation tonight, Urban Systems. We have Mark Hall and Dylan Houlihan, who will talk to us about the always riveting Village of Ashcroft Subdivision and Development Services bylaw number 839. Gentlemen, over to you.
Well, thank you. There might be rivets in the subdivision development servicing bylaw mentioned, but I can't guarantee that this will be riveting on its own.
Okay.
But we'll try.
Okay.
Thanks for having us here, and thanks for allowing us to participate via Zoom or Teams. Yeah, we're here to talk about the subdivision and development servicing bylaw. We've been working on this for a while now. I understand it's gone through first and second reading, so but this is just to answer any questions, provide a little bit of background of what's been done thus far, and like I said, give you a chance to answer any questions.
Okay, thank you.
Next slide, Joey. During the agenda, I think we'll do a refresher on the purpose of the subdivision development servicing bylaw. Quick review of what we've done, how we've gotten to tonight, and go through some of the components of the Ashcroft bylaw as it stands now. And next slide. So what is a subdivision development and development servicing bylaw? It provides direction for new development and subdivision. That's probably the obvious component. Important because it ensures that everyone's on the same page for development, developer and the village in particular. So make sure that there's clarity in that relationship between you from a design perspective, from a roles and responsibility perspective. It provides a lot of direction for who's responsible for what and who's responsible for what costs, which is particularly important. And it provides consistency in development approach. That can be at a kind of global level, making sure that subdivisions look somewhat similar. You can get into the micro level, making sure that you're using the same types of equipment or products in your development areas. Particularly important when you go to actually maintain some of this infrastructure. You don't want things that are all different and you have to try to source parts or pumps or whatever you might have to implement. It identifies levels of service for new development, so what you expect in terms of sidewalks, lighting, where you put the power, those kinds of things, parking, on-street parking. So we identify levels of service for those new development areas, and so we want to make sure that it's consistent with the direction that was provided in the official community plan. And so it's a good process to have this come after the work on the official community plan. At a tangible level that provides direction for things such as water infrastructure, sanitary sewers, stormwater, roads, lighting, landscaping, a few other things. Any questions?
No, thank you.
Can you hear me all right?
Yep.
Okay. Good. Next slide, please. Why is a subdivision development servicing bylaw important? Well, your last subdivision bylaw was from the 1980s, and a lot of best practices have changed. I like to think that this subdivision bylaw is one of your most important bylaws because it really makes sure that development happens in a way that's consistent with the values of the village as espoused in the official community plan. I think it's also pretty important because you end up owning infrastructure that a developer installs or develops or constructs. So they want to make sure they're doing it right. And the subdivision development servicing bylaw is one piece of making sure that developers are doing this right. Provides more certainty for developers. So people coming to town, they want that certainty. If they're going to develop land in the village of Ashcroft, they want to know what the village's processes are. So sometimes people will look at some of these regulations and they think that they're onerous or they're difficult for developers. But good developers will want to see something like this in place as it helps them out. Likewise, it provides for a more efficient process. So if everything is spelled out fairly clearly and there's not as much ambiguity, it can just be a more efficient process. If you have something in place that says you either comply or you don't comply and it's easy to navigate, that just makes it easier for the developer, and the developer doesn't incur as much cost to develop something that they're trying to hit a mark that's hard to achieve when they don't know what the village is looking for. So we want to make sure that we're providing clarity, and we want to make sure we're providing efficiency and effectiveness in this process. Like I've been saying, it helps with the implementation of the official community plan, and a subdivision development servicing bylaw has the potential to impact the development style of the community, the cost for development, and the long-term operations and maintenance of new infrastructure resulting from development. Like I said, you end up owning stuff that wasn't built by you. So you want to make sure it gets built right as part of this process. And so the bylaw can help quite a bit in that regard. Here's the key players. On the left-hand side, you have the kind of the developer side. On the right-hand side, you have the village's side. The owner will typically engage mostly with the approving officer, sometimes with council, but we wouldn't necessarily recommend that once you have the subdivision development servicing bylaw in place. The approving officer is really in charge of making sure that things are done in the best interest of the community. And so the approving officer doesn't necessarily report to council, but they will take direction from council as well as through the bylaw itself, as well as through official community plan, those kinds of things, determine what the public interest is on development. The owner will typically engage an engineer. We're sometimes that role in other communities. They'll do all the design work and whatnot, and they'll engage primarily with your public works director or your approving officer or your chief administrative officer, depending on what the issue is. And it also depends who's wearing that approving officer hat. Some communities, the chief administrative officer is wearing the approving officer hat, and other communities, they contract that out. And some other communities, it might be a public works director or someone like that that's wearing the approving officer hat. Once things are designed, you get a contractor involved who will do all the construction. So the owner will engage a contractor. And then you'll have an inspector involved who will inspect the works and services that get installed. The engineer is responsible for reporting with the inspector and making sure the contractor is doing things right and reports back to the owner on this stuff. Other village staff might get involved in this process, but mainly it's in a community like yours, it's the public works director and your approving officer and chief administrative officer will primarily be involved. And you might get other outside counsel to help you out, whether that's a consultant to help you out with development reviews or things like that. Any questions on that, or does it make sense?
Yeah, thank you.
So in terms of the process of developing the bylaw, we started off with a council workshop. I think that was late 2018, around that time frame. We did a community survey on the level of service. So we wanted to, at the workshop, we presented some options for various levels of service, because that really helped us articulate what kind of development would be desired in Ashcroft. And it really helps to inform how much new development would cost. So we provided you with a series of options for different levels of service. Each of them come with different costs associated with them. So For example, if you want sidewalks on both sides of the road and parking and underground power and street lighting, the cost for development of a lot is around $75,000, if I recall correctly. If you only have sidewalks on one side of the road, parking on one side of the road, and overhead power, costs go down. So we're trying to figure out what would be the appropriate mix for Ashcroft. And that led to the development and administration of a survey to the community, trying to seek feedback from people living in Ashcroft on what they would like to see. I will talk about that in a little bit, but we did get good feedback on that. Then we went through the development of the front end of the bylaw, and we had a legal review done on that, so we got that taken care of. Then we had development of design schedules and review by the village, and so that was part where Mark Hall was coming in and meeting quite frequently with Brian to go through those schedules and really make sure that what we were putting together was consistent with what the village of Ashcroft would want in the future. Next slide. Just questions.
No?
So in terms of the components of the bylaw, there's the front end document that we call it. That's the real regulatory aspect of the bylaw. It goes through a lot of issues of who is roles and responsibilities and things like that. There's a levels of service that feeds into the works and services requirements, and so that's how you want to design your new subdivisions and what kind of levels of service the village expects. And then there's the design standards and design schedules that go into detail on how will water be provided in new subdivisions and development, how will sanitary sewer be provided, lighting requirements, those kinds of things. In terms of the front end of the bylaw, some of the key components, we have a requirement to connect the community water and sewer systems. Pretty simple statement, but it's powerful in the sense that you're trying to require that all new developments have access to potable water and a sanitary system. If they don't, then they have to provide their own system, and that would require a different level of service, different area of the community where you put that in. But the requirements connect to that community water system, so trying to dissuade people from trying to do it on their own, so to speak, but connect into the municipal systems as much as possible. The timing of the construction of works and services, and so this gets important when we talk about when developers need to have their works and services approved relative to getting approval on their subdivision and getting approval to start building houses or whatever it might be that they want to construct in their subdivision. It's important because from a developer's perspective, it can really impact their cash flow moving forward if they have to put in all their works and services before they can actually start selling lots and getting building permits to start building homes or whatever they're trying to build. And so that feeds into requirements for fees and security. The village wants to make sure that they're not allowing a development to go ahead without the assurance that the development can be complete from the perspective of all the works and services, so your water, sanitary, roads, and whatnot. So the bylaw comments on how much security needs to be provided. So the owner will have to provide a cost estimate for building everything in the right of way, and then they have to provide a security in the form of a bond or credit line or something to that effect that will allow the village to dip into that if they go bankrupt or they stop work on the project, so you don't end up with a half-finished project. There's process for approvals and transfer of infrastructure from the private sector to the municipal government. So what process does the village have to go through to make sure that what they're seeing designed and constructed is approved by the village? and what's the time frame for transferring that from private ownership to municipal ownership. Also important is the definition of roles and responsibilities, who reports to who's responsible for different components of the bylaw. Like I mentioned earlier, that can be the CAO, that can be the approving officer, different roles and responsibilities in that regard. And so that's spelled out within the bylaw. Maintenance period and security. So how much security do you want to hold back after the developer gets everything done? Usually there's a 1 or 2 year maintenance period, which requires that if something goes awry in that development, the developer is still on the hook. So say there's an issue with the paving and it doesn't go right the first time, you can require that the developer go back in there and fix any issues. And you'll have security on that. So usually it's around 10 or 15% of the overall cost of the development. Then we have enforcement mechanisms identified in there. Any questions on that?
No, thank you.
So like I said, there's different approaches to getting a development to approval. A common approach is to allow the developer to design the works and services and then take a security on that works and service, on the cost of those works and services for the installation. And then that can allow, so it's a provisional approval based on the design. That can allow the developer to get going with some of the other components of development, such as selling lots so that they can have some greater cash flow. In terms of the level of risk and effort for the village, it's a bit higher in terms of the ease of development for owners, for developers. It's also easier from their perspective because it just impacts their cash flow in a different manner. If developers have to get all their works and services designed and constructed and approved, and then they can go on to the next phase, certainly mitigates the risk for the village, but it also provides some more onerous cash flow issues onto the developer and might even preclude them from being able to get the financing for their development. So it's important to try to balance that and provide different options within the bylaw to allow development to occur. So that's what we've tried to do with the Ashcroft subdivision bylaw. And that was something that we heard at the workshop, is that we don't want to provide a process that's too onerous for developers, but we want to protect the village and village's risk profile.
So I think, Dylan, what you're saying is that, excuse me, the developer can provide a bond. So that's basically an insurance policy that they purchase and have the village as the beneficiary in the event that they don't stand up and complete the work that they promised, right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah. So just from a developer's perspective, I think it's just a smoother process. I think for a lot of municipalities, if they have their druthers, they would go with option 2 and get everything built first before they approve subdivision and approve building permits for new buildings, but that makes it challenging for the developers for sure. Any questions?
No.
So in terms of levels of service, and this is something that can really impact costs. A lot of communities want to have a high level of service because it impacts the aesthetic and the functionality of a neighborhood. And so some communities are going towards underground power. They want sidewalks on both sides of the street. That will oftentimes necessitate more stormwater infrastructure. those costs can start to escalate quite significantly. And developers don't want that too, but they have to keep in mind what they think they can sell a lot for within the community that they're working in. If you have low levels of service, so maybe just water, sewer system, and overhead power, no sidewalks, you can develop pretty cheaply. Well, whether that's attractive from the perspective of buyers of some of these lots or from the perspective of 2016. When we had our meetings and when we had the survey out to the community, the message that we heard was that there's a desire for a balanced approach. So we don't need the full underground power and all those kinds of things that really make a subdivision really aesthetically pleasing, but you also don't want extremely low levels of service that make it just cheap and maybe not functional for people walking or in wheelchairs or otherwise. So it's that real balance between cost of development and the levels of service. Any questions?
No.
As you're probably aware, there's currently little variation in levels of service in Ashcroft. Most places don't have sidewalks. Some areas have stormwater management while others don't. Yeah, 16-meter right away in some areas, 20-meter right away in other areas, where the actual functionality of the roads and whatnot don't differ too much, with the exception of maybe some of your streets allow more on-street parking than others. Not a ton of sidewalks outside of the downtown area. So that's something that's important to consider in terms of what's there now and what you want to be in new development in the future. Well, like I said, we had a survey in 2018. We had about 103 respondents, when I remember, and they said that they want a moderate level of service. They want sidewalks, they want parking on street, but they're all right with overhead power. And overhead power can be a pretty significant cost savings. So from the perspective of the developer, so this seemed to be the one that kind of balanced out all the objectives of people living in the community. And it provides that balance between cost of new development versus the aesthetics or quality of life impact. So making sure that you have a sidewalk so that people can get around the new development is important, but allowing overhead power is fine from the perspective of people that filled in the survey. So this just gives you an idea of what that might look like. We have on the left-hand side a little cross-section that shows what the development might look like and the cost per lot, which in 2019 dollars was $55,000. On the right side is just a picture of what that kind of looks like in profile. This is in Kamloops, so. Any questions?
No.
Hey, Mark, if I may, I'll turn it over to you to talk about design standards.
Oh, okay, yeah. So we reviewed the schedules with Brian. We started off with some basic examples of what other communities had used. We looked at it, we reviewed what was included in the 1980s version of the bylaw, and basically went over everything and to determine what I guess both from components, from how you design the system, what standards are we used for installation and that sort of stuff. We kind of went over everything with Brian in fairly good detail. So, you know, if you don't like it, we'll blame Brian. No, just kidding. So generally, like I said, the idea here is, you know, we'll take water, for example. You know, a developer has to look at their property, determine how many homes, you know, what flow rates are required, make sure that all the hydrants are in the right place, make sure they have all the valves in the ground that will allow the village in the end to, you know, to control the system and repair the system, make sure they put the right components in the ground that that the village currently stocks parts for, and B, that have, you know, demonstrated longevity, you know, for village staff, like pieces of, products that they've used for, you know, for some time. And we essentially went through all of the noted schedules and, you know, tried to fine tune them the best we could. The street lighting is a bit of an anomaly because it's in there, I guess, start off with, yes, street lights are required, but specifically about if you wanted to have an independent streetlight system, not something that was on the, you know, the BC Hydro lease lighting. If you wanted to have underground power, there's standards that need to be followed. So it's, like I said, it's not that they have to have that. They have to have street lighting, but they don't have to necessarily have underground power. And then the landscaping, retaining walls, and site grading are all more or less, you know, just to make sure that in the future that the people are able to maintain their lots. They're not directing their runoff onto their neighbors, and they're not making, you know, they're not making the lots unlivable or not maintainable. I think that is about it. I don't know, does anybody else have any questions on that?
No, thank you.
No.
Thank you.
Yeah, I think the only other thing I want to say here is on the last one, the standards for submission. We, you know, I know even from recent submissions to the village, this really speaks to what the owner of the property has to provide the village for review. In other words, you don't want them to come in with you know, the back of a napkin and say, here, this is what we want to build. They want to be able to demonstrate to the approving officer or director of public works what they want to build, so that everybody has an understanding of that. Okay, that's it. I guess I can talk about this too. So other elements, you know, as we spoke before, making sure that the components they put in are components that the village use. With the approved products list, we reviewed that again with the village and made sure that the items we listed are in fact products that the village typically uses. Software programs, this is a little bit more high level, but just to make sure that the developer doesn't present something to you that, you know, that causes you to have to go out and buy a special program just to review their conclusions. The supplementary detailed drawings with the part of this bylaw, we used master municipal construction documents as a basis for the specifications. They also have a list of detailed drawings showing things like how do you install a fire hydrant, or how do you install a catch basin, or that type of thing. We did review the standard the MMCD standards, and then we augmented this with some specific details or kind of made in Ashcroft construction. And same with the specifications, some that didn't make sense with MMCD, we added clarification on that, so that the developer's contractor has to build everything in, I guess, good condition and follow the rules of the trade, I guess. I think that's probably all I've got to say on that, so.
And the last slide here is about parks and trails and green space, and I know my understanding is that it's come up in some of the previous meetings and pertaining to this topic, and just wanted to say parks and green space are often not dealt with in subdivision servicing bylaws, and part of this is subdivision servicing bylaws really about making things consistent or uniform to one another, and oftentimes you want parks and green space to be unique places, and so it's not necessarily the best place to deal with some of those issues. Your best to do it through your official community plan, which you do to a large extent, and to capture some of this through rezoning processes or other processes. So if, say, a developer is coming in for rezoning and you want to make sure that there's an amenity space provided, or a park or something, it's best to do it at that point, and to work with the developer to see what might be the most appropriate form of space to provide. The OCP does provide guidance on these issues, requiring the payment of cash in lieu of parkland while prioritizing maintaining existing parkland. I know when we developed the OCP, and maybe some of this has changed, there's real desire not to necessarily take on new park spaces, but rather accentuate the park spaces that you already have. And that can be a pretty important thing to consider, because I know in Kamloops, one of the things that they complain about is having these tot lots all over the place, and they do provide a benefit to the neighborhood, but from an operations and maintenance perspective, they are fairly challenging to maintain. They do cost quite a bit of money to do so. So it's something to consider. The OCP also talks about requiring trails, pathways, and or sidewalks to be incorporated within the design of new subdivisions. So it does provide that guidance. And that's reflected in the subdivision servicing bylaw, where it says concrete walkways shall be provided for access through the subdivision's schools, playgrounds, shopping centers, etc., through discretion of the approving officer. So that's where this is kind of an example where the OCP works in tandem with subdivision bylaws. If someone's developing something, developing a number of lots, you can make sure that there is some appropriate connections that you want to see made between key areas for pedestrians or people on bikes or whatever it might be, so that it is attractive from that perspective. Does that make sense, or?
Dylan, when you talk about tot lots, do you mean those little sort of standalone green spaces with a couple of pieces of playground equipment?
Yeah, exactly.
Okay. That often look like they're marooned.
Maroon?
Or stranded in the middle of.
Yeah. No, I know. They kind of pop out at you in unexpected places, and that's just a legacy of some of these subdivisions.
Right.
Yeah, there's certainly an amenity to them, particularly if there's not a major park nearby. But their actual usefulness for people other than a bit of playground equipment is questionable. And I think in Kamloops, their experience is that some of these places don't get used very often at all. And so it's like, well, why are we keeping this off there? if it's not being used. Some of them get used quite frequently, so, yeah, I think in a community like Ashcroft where everything's relatively close, regardless of where you live, you want to question whether you get a lot of value out of having that new park space versus you're allowed I think it's 4% cash in lieu of park space. That's not an insignificant chunk of money that could be directed to your existing park space for new equipment or whatever it might be.
Okay, thank you. Anyone else have any? Nope.
I guess just to finalize, sorry, this is the last slide. The next step is the subdivision bylaws. Danielle has forwarded some of those on to us, and so we'll make those, and then I guess it's adoption for you guys. And then we talked about doing a development procedures manual. And so what that would do is provide more guidance for developers or directions for developers on the various components of development, whether that's applying for a development permit area guideline, applying for a development permit, or applying for a rezoning or a variance or subdivision or those kinds of things. So it's all spelled out and provides guidance for staff, for council, and for developers on how to navigate the Ashcroft processes.
Sort of a one-stop shop for developers.
Yeah, and some communities distill that into brochures that can be handed out. So you have at your front counters, like someone's like, oh, I'm interested in getting the development permit. You hand out the brochure to them and say, this is how you do it. And it's really about facilitating better dialogue between the village and the developer too, right? So lays out those processes. So it's more process oriented than say the bylaws themselves, which speak to the regulations. And so it's like, we want you to come in at this stage to go through your development so that you're not doing everything that's required in the subdivision bylaw without first informing the village. You don't want people coming in with a complete set of drawings the first time they interact with you.
Great. Okay. Thank you. Does anyone have any questions, comments for Dylan and Mark? No? Pretty straightforward, okay.
Okay.
All right, well, in that case, thank you very much, gentlemen.
Thank you. Time to go out birthday cake.
Time to go have what?
Birthday cake.
Oh, boy. Your birthday?
Yeah. This is the second time in 4 years I've had to present the Village of Ashcroft on my birthday.
Well, see, if you'd come in, we would have been able to have cake.
What's that?
We would have been able to have cake if you'd actually been here.
Yeah. The last time Michelle made me cupcakes.
There you go. Well, happy birthday.
Yeah,
Happy
birthday.
Well, thanks for your time tonight, and thanks for inviting us. And I hope this all made sense for you and helps you get through this process.
Okay, well, thank you for your help with the process. It's been a very interesting journey.
Great.
Okay. Thanks.
Hey, everybody.
Have a good night.
Night. Night. Good night.
All right. Does anyone, they're gone now, so it's too late if you have any questions. Okay, so we move on to item 5. We have no discussion items. We have no bylaws for discussion. We have nothing else to do except terminate this committee of the whole meeting. Do I have a seconder for that? Councilor Davenport, all those in favor? Opposed?